Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Centric. This being the show where I talk about TV shows that are crime dramas. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Tracker, Season 1, Episode 2. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we have the opening to the episode where we have Coulter's mom finding a note saying, like, we're watching you, or I'm watching you, and she sees, like, the door to like a shed or just kind of an extra extension to like the cabin or whatever open, and she ends up checking it out, sees the place is kind of a mess, and calls up Coulter, which I think is so interesting because when he gets there eventually, she's like, I overreacted, I shouldn't have told you, it wasn't worth anything. So it's like, why call him in the first place? Because it seems like maybe she knows if she doesn't, Coulter's going to find out about it later on, so it's like, I might as well nip this in the bud while I can. Or maybe she did just kind of panic, but then she's like, no, I need to come up with some excuses. I need to make him, because she probably already knew he was weary of stuff because getting calls from his brother last episode, asking all these questions about him and their dad, so. And also, it's like, oh, but was anything taken? She's like, I don't think so. I wouldn't know. But then Coulter notices that like there's a figurine that's out of the spot because obviously there's a circle from where it was because it hadn't been moved in so long. And he even says a line of, yeah, Dad always had a place for everything. And she's like, really? I wouldn't notice. So either she did some moving around or someone else. Like, what would be the point of moving that little thing? Not unless they were looking for something that might be hidden under these, or like, what could it be, like an SD card type of thing, a microchip? Like, what is it they were looking for? And his mom's still not giving him answers. And he's trying not to push her too much because it's like, it's your mom, you love her, whatever her reasons are, you know she has her reasons, but you still want to know. But you know the more you push, the more you're just going to push her away, and she's just going to be more on the defense. So I guess you're trying to pretend like everything's okay, so it's more, because even to the point he's like, you know what, I'm gonna feel much better if I stay here over the night, which he did, and he eventually leaves. But she was just kind of like about that because she didn't want him sticking around because it's like, well, whoever it is, what if they come back around, or what if my son does some more snooping that he doesn't need to do? So she's definitely hiding something. He just doesn't know what. And like I said, he's just trying to play it cool, calm, and collected until then. So, because later on in the episode, it comes up that his father's death was ruled an accident. So I was like, okay, so his brother never, because they're labeling it as like, oh, he fell. So it's like, okay, so only Coulter may, well, and even he doesn't know because he got there after the fact, but he saw his brother up there. So it's like, oh, did you push Dad? And it's like, he'll never have the answers. So his brother would deny it, but even if his brother denies it, it's like, he does have this sense of being able to tell that people are lying to him, but has he been around his brother enough to really discern that? Like, I mean, who knows what their bond is like after that day? Like, there's decades in between of, well, what was your relationship like after that? Because I was thinking, like, did he go to jail for a little while? I was like, no, it was labeled an accident, and like maybe Coulter kept his mouth shut about it, or does his mom and sister know about him potentially thinking his brother killed their dad? You would assume so, and maybe it was the mom's decision to label it an accident, and just because of that, like the family's been so disconnected. So once again, we don't know what Coulter's relationship is like with his sister. We know he's distant with his brother to the point the mom is like, just ignore him. So it seems like he's the black sheep of the family. So they've ignored him. So maybe who knows what he's gotten up to in all that time frame. Maybe he's been working to try and figure out what this was all about. Whereas like Coulter probably did up to a certain point, but maybe every attempt he made to try to look deeper into it, his mom shut him down. So maybe he gave up. Who knows? Maybe it's, all this is resurfacing now, but over all these years, how much has Coulter dedicated time to looking into this on his personal time, a part of his job? His job is kind of his way of deflecting from all of this past trauma, but how much has he used that job to try and deal with said trauma? Maybe that's just what the nature of this course of the show is going to be about, but he's been doing his job for a while, so I guess maybe something in this show, maybe this episode in particular, or last episode and this episode will act in conjunction to kind of push him to finally start looking in the uncomfortable spots of the past that he doesn't want to look into, you know? Either way, the job he ends up finding himself this time is a guy named Jackson went missing. Basically, he was dating someone named Rebecca. The mom didn't really like her because she was like older than him, and it's just, she's like, my son like quit his job, cut off all contact with us, emptied his bank account, like something's going on here. And especially when they ultimately couldn't find anything about Rebecca, where she went, what she worked at, what she did, who she really was. Bobby did some digging, and the only thing he could find was connecting this Rebecca, even though she had a different name, to another Rebecca Pendergast, who was a con artist. She was like insurance fraud and stuff like that. Which it almost, I was about to say, I was watching something recently, and it was Hightown. Like, when you're going undercover, when you're creating a new persona or whatever, why not just keep this? Because if you use your own name, it makes it easier to continue to lie, because you don't, that's the best lies, they don't stray too far from the truth. So it's like, as long as you're able to come up with, like, keep your first name, it makes it a little easier to lie, because it's like, well, it's not a lie, my name is Rebecca. So I think it's kind of that similar principle, why she kept the same first name but just like changed her last name. But ultimately, it turns out, because first Rebecca's address led to this empty house that only had like a computer setup where they were keeping eyes on all these people, and you're like, what the hell is this all about? What are they watching people? There's a security group there to keep an eye on things as well. And ultimately, it turns out this is all connected to a cult, which the leader of it is Seth. He's played by the actor, most recently you saw him playing Uncle Frank in Riverdale. So I was like, hey! But yeah, he leads a cult. The moment you see it, you're like, ooh, this screams cult. So it's like, yeah, Seth wants to talk to you, and he's taken such an interest in Coulter, so that when he shows up later on, Coulter can only get access to Jackson if he talks to Seth. And so Seth wants to kind of sit down with you, get a read on you. It sounds very, just a little bit I know about Scientology, of like, kind of getting a read on person. I mean, I guess that's any cult, but that sounds very specifically very Scientologist-like, but I've seen enough stuff with cults and stuff, but I haven't done a deep dive into cults to know. I'm sure that's all about, them reading your temperature, kind of getting to know you, because it's about reading you in a way of getting to know what weaknesses to take advantage of. And that's what a cult does. When you are at your lowest, they know how to pick apart those weaknesses, because they're very good at studying people and finding those weaknesses that they can take advantage of. But especially the moment Seth got his opportunity, he talks about, I've looked into you. I know about your circumstances. I know about the people you work with. I know the job that you do and why you do it. And it's like, your dad, was it an accident? Did he slip? Did someone push him? Your mom's not telling the truth. He's very good at reading people. He doesn't have all the details. So, why did your dad, he was a smart scientist. Why did he quit his job? He's like, what, your research didn't tell you? It's like, oh, so you don't know either. And it's like he, whether you want to or not, as well trained as he is dealing with people, you can't help for certain tells that your body will naturally have, like whether you're like darting your eyes or whether it's just certain movements you make. He's studied enough people to know how to pick up on it. That's what he does for a living. So he's able to kind of pick up on these little reactions from Coulter, no matter how much he's trying to hide it. So it kind of like your non-answers or lack thereof answers, and your like slight body adjustments and stuff is enough to give him the answers that he needs. So it's like, right, tell me one truth, about like your dad or whatever. And it's like, he did everything to prepare me for, it's like, my dad wasn't in the games. He prepared me for the world. So, which obviously this episode kind of gets into the good and bad of that as he talks to Jackson, because he sees a lot of himself in Jackson. It's like, hovering family. He never had an opportunity to really sprout his wings. He's like, dude, if I didn't like do all this to get away from my family, they'd make me stay in the same bedroom I grew up in as my childhood. And it's just, he felt like they were always hovering, and he never had an opportunity just to be himself, to be out, just to kind of spread his wings. But for the first time, he's able to be free. He feels free. Because he talks about how Seth can kind of see right through you, which was actually Coulter that made that comparison first and foremost, comparing Seth to his dad. It's like, my dad had the power just to be it. Sometimes when you look at it, he just like felt like he could see right through you. And it's like, Seth is exactly the same way. And even made the comparison of, he makes you, like, he's like, but Seth makes me feel free and stuff like that. He's like, that wasn't my old man. My old man, he could lose his temper, which we saw a little bit in that flashback last episode of how he could just like fly off the handle. And it's like, does Rebecca or Seth do that? And Jackson didn't really say anything, but it kind of seemed like it. I'd assume it's from Rebecca's side of things. But I wouldn't be too surprised if, I mean, Seth had that line where he was like, I'm not a violent man. It's like, only violent men say they're not violent men. You know, just because it feels like an overcompensation, like, oh, I'm not a violent man. But even Coulter had responded saying that there are different kinds of violent. And then he was like, yeah, what kind of man was your father? And kind of transitioned in that conversation, so. But it's like any cult situation, Jackson feels like he's better off here, and he's not, because he's like, oh yeah, my overbearing parents, and they keep watch over me all the time. It's like, how is that different from all the cameras that are on you in this facility? But he's like, yeah, but this is because I'm a newcomer, I'm pretty like in the middle of my process, and I can't go to my family because it's going to disrupt that, and I need to be monitored. It's like you're so like trapped in this thinking you're feeling good. You're not realizing the BS that you're being used. It's like, could we find out that this cult, they had a numbers person, an account person beforehand, but they died in a car accident. The wife believes that the cult was behind it because they used to be members, but it's like, it's not that easy to leave a cult, even willingly. You know, obviously we see with Jackson, who's reluctant to leave the cult because he believes this is where he belongs. He feels like he belongs here. It's finally the best version of himself is here. But then you had someone who tried to leave the cult who ended up dead, so. Teddy and Vilma visited the wife and got to talking to her, and it's like, right, turns out she saw the evidence that proved that they did it because they kept it. Seth keeps evidence. Specifically, he keeps physical evidence because he doesn't want to take the chance that someone could hack something digitally, which is so jacked up and like, which it's like, oh, Vilma and Teddy specifically said he keeps evidence on every person he ever met, which I was like, so that must mean there's dirt on Rebecca too. I thought that's the direction the story was going to go. I thought Coulter was going to use what, it's like, oh, Rebecca, you actually, it's hard to say whether Rebecca really believed and was all about the BS. I don't think she was, because we found out that basically the accountant that was killed in the car accident, turns out he found out that Rebecca and Seth were draining people's accounts. So you were just taking all their money as well. So they were lining their pockets in the process. So she was so it wasn't like she was a true believer. I thought she was someone that was so wrapped up in this BS that she actually started believing it. And I thought maybe if Coulter showed her like, oh, look at all this dirt Seth has on you, and it would change everything for her. But no, it's like, no, she's all about it. Granted, that was what was necessary for Coulter to wake Jackson up, was like he got the file that proves like, hey, they got this dash cam footage from the car accident, and they have it because I guess that was their way of confirming it was done, but also I guess blackmail whoever was responsible for killing him in the car accident. That way it's like, oh, if you ever betray us, you'll go down because we have the physical evidence to prove it. But Coulter also saw, stuff from Rebecca, which he used to get to Jackson, but he also saw his file. Well, we don't know what Seth and them found out about Coulter and his family. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But it was enough for Jackson, because at first he still didn't want to believe it until it's like, yeah, look at this dash cam footage. Oh, the Rebecca you thought you knew, it's this person. And for her, it's like, during her confession, her second time getting arrested, her father disowned her the first time, but the second time, her father basically pretended like he didn't have any children. But then, like, for Jackson, it's like, I burned myself, because the whole point was you burn yourself when a person confesses their secret, and it's like, it's a reminder that you're holding on to that person's secret that is kind of bound to you. But it's like, I burned myself because I thought she shared a secret with me, and because it was found, that was like I guess you can almost look at it as like this fundamental core thing that got him sucked up into this BS that is this cult. But ultimately, like him finding out Rebecca was a liar, he snapped and kind of tackled her. And I was like, hey, yo. He's like, you're all liars, threw the paper and then tackled her. I was like, good on you, Jackson. So luckily the cops showed up and everyone's arrested. But just to be a dick, like Seth had to have the last laugh by being like, doesn't change anything, Coulter. Doesn't change the fact that you're still going to be haunted by your father's ghost. It's like, shut up, you piece of shit. You didn't have to say anything. That's the problem. He is a no good, dirty criminal, but he is very good at. It doesn't change the fact is he is good at reading people. So what he said did strike a chord with Coulter, because even Coulter can recognize you might be a hack in the regards of being. Well, you might be a criminal and a con artist and a cult leader, but it doesn't change the fact is you are still good at reading people enough to kind of see through us. Plus, whatever research you and your squad came up with. I'd assume like he didn't see he had his two like security people, but like it seemed like the only team he really had was Rebecca. I guess she handled a lot of that stuff, like the research and stuff like that. It seems like she's the reason why he was able to kind of get whatever information he could in the long run. But luckily, it's all said and done. It may not resolve Coulter's issues. It may be a stepping stone in him figuring things out. But the most important thing is he was able to get Jackson back home and reminded Jackson that he's young. He'll figure things out. He'll be okay because he's also got people who love him back in his corner. So that's a good thing in the long run. So ultimately, Coulter ends up looking at the file at the end of the episode. We don't know if maybe whatever was in that file didn't pertain to anything new. Maybe it kind of helps connect, like maybe it's some notes from Seth or notes from, probably most likely Seth. Like, I was about to say not unless Rebecca put some notes in there, but like it could be stuff where Seth is like, okay, we could use this. Either it's just the straight up facts and stuff they found, or maybe it could be, I doubt it. I was thinking like maybe Seth could have wrote notes about like, okay, this could be something I could use and bring up in our next discussion or something to kind of manipulate Coulter. Like, I'm probably like reading and thinking way too much about it, but I'm like, it just, the fact is he quickly looked at it and closed it made me feel like either he just started reading and it just like, it was just, I don't want to deal with this right now, I'll deal with it later, or like I said, it just, oh, they came up with base research and it was nothing that he didn't already know. Seth knew what buttons to push in order to kind of make him feel like he knew more than they do, but maybe they never really did. I don't know. Maybe even going back, because he did get the tape too, so I'm wondering is he going to keep it and try and play it and kind of see what kind of reactions he's able to read from himself. Be like, oh, I reacted this way. Probably not, but I'm curious to see will we find out there is actually more to that file or not. Some interesting developments. I'm curious to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.